This is eternal human spirit, where every story proves why humanity never breaks.
The human joke, Daniel never thought his life would end in chains, dragged through a hall of alien stone that glowed with strange symbols. He had been a pilot, proud of his skill, brave in his choices, but now he was nothing more than a prisoner. His starship had been destroyed after a desperate battle against a fleet he could not hope to defeat, and he had been captured by creatures taller than him, their armor glistening like obsidian. Their sharp weapons pressed against his back as they forced him forward. His boots echoed against the polished floor, and he realized he had been brought to the very heart of the alien empire, the throne of their queen. The hall was enormous, lined with banners of colors his eyes struggled to describe. Alien nobles stood on either side, their cold stares following every step he took. To them, Daniel was less than an insect, a fragile creature from a world too small to matter. Yet the fear inside him did not silence his human instinct. He had always used humor to survive, humor to disarm, humor to hide fear. And this moment would be no different. At the end of the hall sat the AlienQueen. Her throne was carved from dark crystal, her figure cloaked in flowing armor that seemed alive. Her skin was pale silver, her eyes glowing like molten fire. Every movement she made commanded silence. Every alien in the hall bowed deeply before her, except Daniel, who was pushed to his knees by the guards. He raised his head and forced a smile, because if he was going to die, he would not die silent. The queen looked at him with cold calculation. Her gaze was sharper than any blade. She studied him as if he were not a man but a strange puzzle. A human had never stood before her throne as a prisoner. They had only ever stood as enemies, dying on the battlefield. Now one knelt in chains, fragile yet unbroken. "You are Daniel of Earth," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber like thunder. It was not a question. It was a declaration. Her tongue shaped human words with flawless precision, a reminder that the Empire studied everything about those they sought to conquer. Daniel swallowed. His throat was dry, his mind screaming that he should bow, that he should beg for mercy. But his heart told him that humans did not beg, not even at the edge of death. He tilted his head, his lips curling into a reckless grin. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady though his pulse raced. "Daniel of Earth, pilot, prisoner, part-time comedian, full-time troublemaker." Whispers rippled through the alien nobles. Some sneered, some hissed, others looked at him with disgust. But the queen did not flinch. Her glowing eyes only narrowed slightly as if trying to understand him. Daniel knew he was standing on the edge of death, but his humor rose anyway. He had nothing to lose, and so he let the words slip from his mouth like a spark in the darkness. He looked right into her burning eyes and said, "You'd make a cute wife." The words fell like a stone in a silent lake. The hall froze. The guards gripped their weapons tighter. Some nobles gasped. Others growled in outrage. An execution seemed certain. No one in the galaxy would dare speak to their queen that way. No one except a human who had nothing left. The queen's expression did not change at first. Her face remained still, her eyes unblinking. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought he had finally gone too far. He prepared himself for the strike of a blade, or the flash of an energy weapon. But then something impossible happened. Her lips moved. Her voice, softer now but sharp as glass, whispered two words that shattered the silence of the hall. "I accept." The words struck harder than any weapon. Daniel blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. The guards froze, their weapons halfway raised. The nobles erupted into chaos, voices rising, some shouting that it was madness, others demanding his death, but none daring to move without her command. Daniel's smirk faded into shock. He looked up at her, his joke now twisted into something far beyond his control. The queen stood, her figure towering over him, and repeated with chilling clarity, I accept. The hall roared with noise, but she silenced them with a single wave of her hand. Her glowing eyes never left Daniel's. He had walked into her throne room as a prisoner, and with one reckless joke, he had become something far more dangerous. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. His mind screamed questions he could not ask. What did she mean? Why would she accept such words? Was this some alien game? He tried to speak, but the queen lifted her hand again, not in anger, but in declaration. From this day, she said, her voice booming through the chamber, the human Daniel of Earth is mine. The nobles roared louder, fury and disbelief, mixing into a storm of outrage. Some shouted about ancient laws, others warned of weakness, but the queen ignored them all. Her glowing eyes locked on him as if she saw something no one else could see. Daniel's throat went dry. His joke had turned into a vow enforced by the most feared ruler in the galaxy. He felt the chains loosen, not because they pitied him, but because she had claimed him. He had stepped into this hall as a doomed man, but now he was caught in something far greater than death. As the guards pulled him to his feet, Daniel realized the truth. His joke had not saved him. It had trapped him. And the real danger was only beginning. The queen's claim. The moment the Alien Queen spoke those words, the entire throne room shook with disbelief. The nobles screamed in outrage, their voices clashing like thunder. The guards looked at one another in confusion, unsure whether to raise their blades or drop to their knees. Daniel stood frozen, his mind struggling to understand how a careless joke had just become the most dangerous declaration of his life. He had joked about marriage, a desperate attempt to cover fear with humor, but she had answered as if it were not a jest, but a law carved in stone. She had claimed him, and now the fate of his life, and perhaps even humanity, had shifted in an instant. The queen's glowing eyes never left him. Her pale silver face remained unreadable, but there was something in her gaze, something deeper than mere amusement or cruelty. She studied him like an artifact, like a puzzle she had been waiting her whole life to solve. Slowly, she rose from her throne, her dark crystal armor catching the light, sending shards of brilliance across the chamber walls. The crowd of nobles fell silent at her movement, fear and awe rooting them in place. When she spoke again, her voice rang across the hall with command. By the law of stars, by the covenant of my bloodline, I accept his vow, she declared. Her words echoed like fire across stone. The nobles recoiled, many clutching at their robes as if the very air had betrayed them. The human Daniel of Earth is no longer prisoner. He is bound to me as consort of the throne. The uproar that followed was louder than anything Daniel had ever heard. Alien generals slammed their staffs into the floor, demanding rejection. Priests of strange alien gods cried blasphemy. Some warriors even stepped forward, their blades drawn. But a single glare from the queen stopped them cold. Her authority was absolute, and though they hated it, none dared challenge her directly. Daniel's heart raced. He wanted to laugh, to scream, to demand clarity, but his throat locked. His joke was no longer his own. It had been stolen and reshaped by forces he could not understand. He had no knowledge of alien law, no way of knowing what his words meant in their culture, yet the reaction around him told him everything. His so-called marriage was no small matter. It was binding, sacred, and irreversible. The queen descended the steps of her throne. Each step was slow, deliberate, her gaze never leaving him. When she reached him, she raised her hand, not to strike him, but to touch his face. Her fingers, cold as steel yet strangely gentle, brushed his cheek. He wanted to pull away, but he was held still by a force greater than fear. Her whisper reached only him, though it carried the weight of stars. "You are mine now, human," she said. "By your own words, by ancient covenant. You stand beside me, and no power in this empire will undo it." Daniel's breath caught. He tried to find words, but all he could manage was a shaky half-smile. "I was joking," he whispered back, desperate to break the spell. Her glowing eyes flared brighter, and for the first time, he saw something, almost human in them. Not cruelty, not rage, but amusement. "There are no jokes in the language of vows," she said, "only truths waiting to be spoken aloud." The guards released their grip on him, the chains clattering to the floor. His wrists burned from the weight that had been taken, but the freedom felt heavier than the iron itself. He was no longer a prisoner, yet he had never been more trapped. The alien courtiers watched him with fury, some whispering that he was cursed, others insisting that the queen had gone mad. Yet not one of them dared disobey her, for her rule was law. As the queen returned to her throne, she turned to her generals. "Prepare chambers for him," she commanded. "Guard him as you would. Guard me." The generals hesitated. One of them, a towering alien with 4 arms and jagged armor, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "My queen, forgive me, but this is dangerous. The human is fragile, weak, unworthy of your side. He is a liability, an insult to our traditions." The queen's voice dropped to a tone colder than ice. "You question me?" she asked. The general trembled, lowering his head further. "No, my queen," he whispered. "I live to serve." She turned back to Daniel. "You may breathe freely, but know this, Daniel of Earth. From this moment, every eye in this empire will be upon you. Every breath you take will be weighed. Every word you speak will be judged. Your survival depends on proving you are not the weak creature they believe you to be." Daniel swallowed hard. His humor, usually his shield, felt useless now. He could not joke his way out of this fate, not when his life was tangled with hers. His mind spun with questions. Why had she done this? Did she truly believe his words, or was she using him as a weapon, a pawn in a larger game? He glanced at her glowing eyes and felt both fear and fascination. There was something there he could not yet understand. That night, Daniel was led through the labyrinth of the palace, past walls carved with alien runes, past guards who glared at him as if he were poison. Finally, he was taken to chambers unlike any prison, a grand room of black marble and silver light, filled with strange furniture that seemed to shift when touched. Servants bowed to him, though their eyes burned with contempt. He was dressed, not in rags, but in robes woven from shimmering fabric that clung to his skin like liquid. He sat on the edge of a bed that looked more like an altar, his head in his hands. He had joked once, and that joke had chained him to the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. His mind raced through possibilities. Escape was impossible. Defiance would mean death. Submission would mean losing himself. And yet, beneath the weight of dread, a spark of curiosity burned inside him. Why had she chosen him? Why had she accepted his words so seriously? He remembered her eyes, glowing yet strangely alive, and for the first time, Daniel wondered if the queen, feared by millions, carried loneliness in her heart. He clenched his fists, knowing one truth. Whether by joke or by fate, he was no longer just a human prisoner. He was the queen's claim, and that claim would shake the empire to its core. The silent palace, Daniel woke to silence. Not the silence of peace, but the heavy silence of a palace watching his every move. The chamber given to him was vast, carved from black stone that shimmered with faint blue veins of light. The air carried a strange scent, sharp and metallic, reminding him that he was far from Earth, far from everything familiar. His bed was too large, the walls too tall, every piece of furniture alien in design. It felt less like a room and more like a cage dressed in silk. He rose slowly, every muscle tense, and wandered toward the tall windows that looked out over the alien city. Towers of crystal and stone reached toward the sky, glowing lines of energy pulsing through them like living veins. Strange flying crafts moved between the towers, silent as shadows. Yet, for all the beauty, the city felt cold, lifeless, a monument of power without warmth. Daniel pressed his hand against the glass, wondering if he would ever see Earth's sunrise again. The door to his chamber slid open with a hiss. 2 guards stepped inside, their weapons glowing faintly. They did not speak, their glowing eyes fixed on him with contempt. Behind them entered a servant, slender, dressed in robes of silver, carrying a tray with food unlike anything he recognized. Bowing stiffly, the servant set the tray on a low table before him. The guards remained near the door, silent but watchful. Daniel sat slowly, staring at the food. The shapes and colors were strange, some dishes glowing faintly, others shifting as if alive. He hesitated before touching anything. "Eat." One of the guards said sharply, the first word spoken since they entered. His voice carried disdain. Daniel forced a smirk, trying to hide his unease. "Don't suppose you have bacon and eggs, do you?" he asked. The guards did not answer, their silence heavier than stone. With a sigh, Daniel picked up a piece of food, chewing carefully. It tasted metallic, bitter, yet strangely filling. As he ate, his thoughts churned. Why had the Queen done this? Why claim him in front of her people knowing they despised him? What did she see in him? A fragile human with no army, no power, no place among the stars? He remembered her words. There are no jokes in the language of vows. And a chill ran through him. Had his foolish humor sealed his fate forever? Later, he was escorted from his chambers, led through endless corridors of the palace. The walls glowed with runes that pulsed faintly as he passed, as if the building itself recognized him. Servants whispered, guards glared, nobles sneered when they caught sight of him. The entire palace was alive with scorn. He was not welcome, not respected, not trusted, yet he was untouchable, protected by the Queen's claim. They led him into a great hall, not the throne room, but something smaller. More intimate, it was filled with alien scholars, priests, and generals. They sat around a long, curved table of black stone. Their eyes followed him like predators. The Queen was already there, seated at the head of the table, her presence commanding silence. Even before she spoke, Daniel was forced to stand at her side. He could feel the weight of every gaze. He wanted to crack a joke to break the suffocating tension, but even he knew that would be suicide. The Queen raised her hand, and the room bowed into silence. "This human," she began, her voice calm but unyielding, "is now bound by vow to the throne. His life is mine. His presence is law. You will not question it again." The priests murmured in protest, speaking of sacred tradition. The generals argued that a human consort would weaken the empire's image. One even shouted that Earth was nothing more than a primitive world unworthy of such honor. Daniel stood quietly, but inside he burned. He clenched his fists, wishing he could speak, but the Queen's glare silenced even him. When the noise grew too great, she rose from her seat, her voice cutting like a blade. "Do you think me weak because I choose differently? Do you question my will because it does not fit your narrow laws? Remember who I am," she thundered. "I am the flame that burns the stars. I am the blood that binds this empire. My word is not to be debated. It is to be obeyed." The hall fell silent, trembling beneath her fury. Daniel felt a chill run through him. He realized then that her choice had not been made lightly. Whatever her reason, she would defend it with fire and blood. After the meeting, she dismissed the council, leaving only Daniel behind. For a long moment, she said nothing, her glowing eyes fixed on the stars beyond the tall windows. Finally, she turned to him, her voice softer. "You wonder why I did this," Daniel swallowed. "I'd be lying if I said no." She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "There is an ancient law," she said, "when words of union are spoken, and I accept. It cannot be broken. Even if it was a joke, even if it was a lie, the vow is binding. To break it would be to show weakness before my enemies. To honor it means I stand unchallenged. They will hate it. They will despise you. But they will obey because they must. Daniel's chest tightened. His words, his foolish joke, had bound him not only to her but to the weight of an empire. He opened his mouth to protest, but the look in her eyes silenced him. For the first time, he saw something beyond the ruler's mask. A flicker of something, raw and lonely. She had not just obeyed the law, she had chosen it. That night, as he was led back to his chambers, Daniel could not sleep. The palace was silent, but it was the silence of eyes watching from shadows, of whispers behind walls, of knives waiting in the dark. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling carved with glowing runes. His joke had made him a prisoner of fate, bound to a queen feared by millions. The silence of the palace was suffocating, but within it he heard the faintest echo, the sound of destiny waiting to be written. The human spirit tested. The days that followed were unlike anything Daniel had ever known. In the silence of the alien palace he discovered that the queen's words were not idle. She had claimed him, and to prove her claim she demanded that he endure the ancient trials of worth, trials that even her own generals feared. These were tests not of birth or blood, but of strength, wit, and spirit. For the nobles and the court, it was a chance to expose him, to humiliate him, to show that the fragile human was nothing more than a mistake. For Daniel, it was survival, and perhaps the only way to prove he was more than a pawn. The announcement of the trials spread across the empire like fire through dry wood. Whispers filled the palace halls. Some aliens mocked openly, wagering how long the human would last before he died. Others sneered, claiming the queen had already doomed herself by protecting him. The queen, however, remained silent. Her glowing eyes revealed nothing. She only ordered that the trials begin at once. Daniel stood before her throne once again, the weight of her empire pressing down on him, and for the first time he realized she was not simply defending him. She was daring him to rise. The first trial was of strength. Daniel was led into an arena carved into the belly of the palace, lit by glowing crystals that cast harsh light across the sand. Thousands of alien eyes watched from above. The air thrummed with anticipation. At the center of the arena, a beast waited, a creature twice his height with claws that glistened and a body armored in bone. Its roar shook the air. Daniel's heart pounded. He had no weapons, only a staff of iron thrust into his hands by a guard who smirked at him with contempt. When the beast charged, instinct took over. Daniel had been a pilot, not a warrior, but humans had always known how to fight when cornered. He moved not with skill, but with desperation, rolling, dodging, swinging the staff wildly. Every strike against the beast's armored hide felt useless, yet he did not stop. The alien crowd laughed at first, mocking his weakness, but laughter turned to silence when Daniel's stubbornness kept him alive. He fought with no grace, only grit, bleeding from cuts, bruised from blows, but refusing to fall. At last, in a desperate move, he drove the staff into the creature's open mouth, forcing it deep until the beast choked and collapsed. The arena shook with disbelief. The human had survived. The second trial came swiftly. It was of mind. Daniel was placed within a chamber of shifting light and sound. Strange illusions attacked him, memories twisted, voices of his past whispering lies. He saw his childhood home burning, his crew screaming, his failures magnified 1,000 times. The test was designed to break him, to crush his will until he surrendered. But Daniel clung to something deeper than pride. He clung to laughter, to memory, to the stubborn refusal to let despair consume him. He whispered jokes into the empty air, mocking the illusions even as tears burned in his eyes. Again and again he told himself, "This isn't real. I've lived worse," until at last the chamber fell silent and the illusions shattered like glass. He had endured. The third trial was of loyalty. He was presented with a choice. Freedom, offered if he renounced the queen. All he had to do was kneel before the priests and declare her unworthy. He could walk away, return to Earth if he wished. The temptation clawed at him. The thought of home, of freedom, of being far from this endless weight was almost enough to break him. Yet as he stood there, chains removed, gates open, he remembered her eyes, that strange mix of command and loneliness. He remembered the way she had silenced her empire to protect his life. Daniel did not kneel. He spat at the ground instead and said, "I'm not leaving, not like this." The priests recoiled, furious but bound by their own laws to accept. His choice, each trial left him battered, bloodied, and exhausted. But each trial also made the whispers change. At first, the court had laughed at him, certain he would die, but now some murmured respect. They saw that he did not yield, that his spirit was harder than they imagined. He had no claws, no armor, no empire, yet he carried something invisible, a fire that would not go out. The queen watched all of it from her throne, never speaking, never showing favor, yet her eyes glowed brighter each time he stood victorious. Daniel began to realize the truth. The trials were not meant only to test him. They were meant to show the empire that a human, fragile as he seemed, could endure what even their strongest feared. She had risked everything on him, and with every victory, her gamble grew stronger. That night, alone in his chamber, Daniel lay on the bed, every muscle aching. Every breath was a struggle, but his heart burned with something new. He had survived. He had fought beasts, shattered illusions, rejected freedom, and somehow remained. Standing, he knew the empire still despised him, knew they still whispered for his death. But he also knew something had changed. He was no longer just the human who joked. He was the human who endured. Yet, even as exhaustion pulled at him, Daniel understood something deeper. The trials were not over. The true danger had not yet revealed itself. He could survive beasts and illusions, but the greatest threat would not come from claws or shadows. It would come from the hearts of those who would rather see him dead than see their queen stand beside a human. The silent palace had tested him, but Daniel knew the worst was still to come. His spirit had been weighed, but soon his very soul would be hunted. The secret war. The palace was never truly quiet. Even when the halls stood empty, Daniel could feel whispers moving like unseen currents in the air. The nobles who once mocked him now spoke in hushed tones, no longer laughing but conspiring. The guards watched him with more than contempt now, their eyes sharpened with calculation. He had survived the trials, yes, but survival came with a price. By standing tall, he had shown strength, and strength always attracts enemies. Daniel felt it in his bones. Something larger was stirring, something hidden beneath the grand walls of the empire. It began with shadows. He noticed it one night when a servant slipped into his chamber, trembling as she placed food on the table. Her hands shook, and when she met his eyes for the briefest moment, he saw something. Fear, not of him, but of something greater. When he tried to speak, she lowered her head and whispered in a voice so faint it almost vanished, "They are coming." Before he could ask who, she fled the room, vanishing, like mist. His blood ran cold. He had been marked. Soon after, the queen summoned him privately. They met in a chamber filled with ancient maps, glowing stars suspended in the air, showing borders of empires and fleets scattered across the galaxy. She stood before them like a war goddess, her pale face illuminated by light from 1,000 systems. Her voice was lower than usual, almost hesitant. "You have noticed it, haven't you?" she asked. "The silence between walls, the whispers when you walk past?" Daniel nodded slowly. "They hate me," he admitted. "They want me gone. They want me dead." Her glowing eyes softened, but only for a moment. "It is not only hatred," she said. "It is fear. There are those who see this bond, this vow, as weakness. They believe I have broken tradition, and in their eyes weakness is a wound that invites blood." She turned toward the star map, her hand, passing over a cluster of glowing red lights. "Another empire waits beyond our borders. They watch for cracks in our walls. They hear whispers of rebellion, and they sharpen their knives." Daniel stared at the stars, realizing the scale of her words. This was not simply about a queen and a human, it was about war, entire civilizations, weighing her every choice. "So me being here, it's not just a scandal," he said quietly. "It's a weapon for them." She looked at him then, her gaze burning like fire. "Yes," she said, "to them, you are proof that I can be undone, that I can be mocked, but to me, you are a shield. They do not see it yet, but you will be." Daniel swallowed hard, unsure whether to feel honored or terrified. He wanted to protest, to tell her he was no warrior, no strategist, just a man who had made a foolish joke. But he remembered the trials, remembered how they had tried to break him, and failed. Maybe he was more than he thought. Maybe humanity was more than they believed. The secret war revealed itself slowly. Daniel began noticing patterns. Servants disappearing, generals whispering in dark corners, messages carried through hidden corridors. He even discovered that one of the guards assigned to him carried a hidden blade coated with venom. When he confronted the man, the guard said nothing, only lowered his gaze in shame before being dragged away by the queen's personal enforcers. Daniel understood then that the palace itself was a battlefield, one where blades were hidden and battles were fought with silence instead of fire. One night, as he lay restless in his chamber, the walls trembled with a low hum. He rose and followed the sound through a hidden passage left unguarded. What he found froze his blood. In a secret hall beneath the palace, nobles gathered around. A glowing device, their voices low but sharp. They were speaking of alliances, of contacting the rival empire, of betraying their queen. "She is blinded by the human," one sneered. "This is our chance to strike, to end her reign and take the throne for ourselves." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to step forward, to shout, to fight, but he forced himself to remain. Hidden, he memorized their faces, their words, then crept back to his chamber with the weight of truth burning inside him. The queen was right. A war was already here, and he had stumbled into its heart. The next morning, he demanded an audience with her. The guards hesitated, but when he spoke her name, the doors opened. He found her alone again in the star chamber. She turned at once, her eyes sharp. "What is it?" she asked, sensing the storm in him. "They're planning to betray you," Daniel said, his voice steady. "I heard them. They're reaching out to your enemies. They want to use me as proof that you're unfit. They want your throne." The queen did not flinch. Her glowing eyes darkened, and for the first time Daniel saw the fury of a ruler not on the battlefield, but in the quiet war of shadows. "I know," she whispered. "I have known for some time. But now you know too, and that changes everything." She stepped closer, her voice dropping lower. "You are no longer a prisoner of fate, Daniel. You are part of this war. If they use you as a weapon, then you must become one on my side. The Empire must see that. The human is not a weakness but a strength. Will you stand with me?" Daniel hesitated, his mind screaming that he was only one man, that he was no warrior in this war of empires. Yet he remembered the beast in the arena, the illusions that had tried to break him, the temptation of freedom, and he remembered how he had stood every time. He raised his head and met her burning gaze. "I'll stand," he said simply. The queen's lips curved in something almost like a smile, faint but real. "Then let the shadows come," she said. "They will learn that even a joke can ignite a fire strong enough to burn empires." That night, as the city slept, Daniel sat by the window of his chamber, staring at the stars. He could feel it now, the weight of destiny pressing down on his shoulders. The secret war was no longer hidden. It was everywhere, in every whisper, every glare, every silence. He had become more than a consort, more than a pawn. He was a human caught in the tide of galactic power, and he knew that the storm had only just begun. The Queen's confession. The war in the shadows did not slow. In the days that followed, Daniel found himself caught between endless glances and silent judgments. Every corridor of the palace carried whispers. Every noble wore masks of false loyalty. He felt the tension growing heavier with each passing hour, like a storm waiting to break. Yet amidst that storm, the Queen remained steady, unyielding before her court. She carried herself as though nothing could shake her, but Daniel had begun to see the cracks no one else dared to notice. It was late one night when he found her alone in the star chamber again. The vast room was dark except for the swirling map of galaxies that floated above, shimmering lines of light tracing ancient borders. She stood at the center, her back to him, her silver cloak flowing around her like liquid shadow. Daniel hesitated at the doorway, but her voice reached him before he could speak, soft yet commanding. "Come in, Daniel." He stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing across the stone floor. "You always know when I'm here," he said quietly, trying to break the heavy silence. Her glowing eyes turned toward him, soft in the dim light. "You are not as quiet as you think," she said, a faint curve on her lips. For the first time, her tone was not sharp, not commanding, but almost gentle. She studied him, as though measuring not his body, but his soul. "You've seen what this palace hides," she continued. "You've seen the poison in their words, the blades in their shadows. Tell me, human, do you think I am a fool for choosing you?" Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know what to think," he admitted. "I don't know why you accepted my words that day. I don't know why you keep protecting me, but I do know you're not a fool." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't strike me as the type to gamble without reason." For a long moment she said nothing. She turned back to the stars, her glowing eyes reflecting 1,000 lights. Finally, her voice came low, almost a whisper. "I have been queen for longer than your world has known space. I was raised in a palace of stone and silence, groomed for a throne that was not mine by choice but by blood. From the moment I breathed, I was not a daughter, not a sister, not even a woman. I was a crown." Daniel listened, the weight of her words sinking into him. She was feared across the galaxy. Yet in that moment she sounded less like an empress and more like a prisoner of her own throne. "They say I am ruthless," she continued. "They call me the flame that burns the stars. They bow because they fear me. But fear is not loyalty. It is a chain, and chains can be broken. I have lived surrounded by millions, yet I have been alone. No voice dares speak to me without trembling. No eyes dare meet mine without flinching. And then came you, Daniel of Earth. You looked at me not as a monster, not as a goddess, but as a woman, and you dared to laugh." Her voice caught for the briefest second, so subtle that only Daniel noticed. She turned her face away, but he had already seen the flicker of something raw beneath her perfect mask. "When you joked, you shattered the silence that has ruled my life. Your words were reckless, foolish, even insulting by the laws of this empire. But to me," she paused, and her glowing eyes dimmed. "To me, they were real, more real than every vow sworn in fear, more honest than every pledge whispered in trembling. You gave me no worship, no boo, no empty praise. You gave me truth." Daniel's chest tightened. He had never thought of it that way. To him it had been nothing but instinct, a shield of humor against certain death. Yet to her it had been something far greater, something human. He stepped closer until he stood just a pace. "Away. So when you said, 'I accept,' it wasn't just the law, was it?" he asked softly. Her lips curved into something between a smile and a scar. It was the law, yes, but it was also my choice. For the first time in 1,000 years, I wanted something not because I had to, but because I wished it. I accepted not because you bound me, Daniel, but because I wanted to bind myself. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not the silence of the palace, not the silence of judgment. It was a silence alive with unspoken truths. Daniel felt the weight of her confession settle on him, not as a burden, but as something fragile, something precious. The galaxy might see her as untouchable, but here, in this chamber, she had lowered. Her crown, Daniel swallowed hard, his voice quiet. You could have anyone in this empire bow to you. You could command 1,000 warriors to pledge themselves. Why risk all of this? For me. Her glowing eyes met his, burning not with command but with something raw. Because none of them are human, she whispered. None of them can make me feel alive with a single careless word. None of them can look at me without fear. None of them can laugh when death stands at their throat. Only humans carry that fire, and you carry it brighter than most. Daniel had no answer. His throat tightened, his chest heavy. He wanted to speak, to make light of it, but for once his humor failed him. He simply stood there, staring at the queen who had conquered stars yet, confessed to loneliness, the queen who had bound herself to him not as ruler to pawn, but as a woman to a man. At last she stepped back, her mask sliding over her face once more. Her voice grew steady, strong. Do not mistake this truth for weakness, Daniel. I cannot show this to anyone else. If they knew I felt even a flicker of doubt, they would devour me. But you will know, and only you. Carry it as a weapon, or carry it as a bond, but do not let it fall. Daniel nodded slowly, the weight of her confession pressing into him like a brand. He realized then that he was no longer just a human caught in alien games. He was something else, something unexpected, a confidant, a partner, a witness to the heart of the most feared queen in the galaxy. That night, as he returned to his chambers, Daniel could not sleep. Her words haunted him, burned into him. He had joked once, and it had changed the galaxy. But now it was no longer a joke. It was real, and he had to decide what to do with it. The queen had shown him her scars, and in them he saw his own reflection, fragile yet unbroken, lonely yet defiant. Together, perhaps, they were more than rulers and prisoners, more than alien and human. Perhaps they were the spark that could either save the galaxy or set it aflame. The human's choice. The palace no longer felt like stone and crystal. It felt like a battlefield made of silence. Daniel could sense it in every corridor, in the way nobles lowered their voices when he passed, in the way guards gripped their weapons tighter as if waiting for permission to strike. The queen's confession still echoed in his mind, her words cutting through him like fire and shadow. She had revealed her truth, shown him her loneliness, and in doing so, had given him something no one else in her empire could ever hold, her trust. Yet with trust came weight, and that weight pressed harder than chains. It was not long before the storm arrived. Word spread across the empire of a rival fleet crossing the border. A vast armada, armed with weapons forged to crack planets, had begun its march toward the queen's throne. The nobles seized upon the chance to call her weak, whispering that her bond with a human had invited this challenge. Some even dared to speak of surrendering her throne to avoid war. But the queen stood tall, her glowing eyes unyielding. If they believe me weak, she declared, then they will learn what weakness truly means. Daniel stood at her side during the war. Council, surrounded by generals and priests who despised his presence, the star map flickered above the table, red lights marking the advancing fleet. His heart pounded as he studied it, realizing just how hopeless it seemed. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and even the queen's loyal armies whispered of doom. For a moment he felt small again. a human, lost in the void. But then he remembered her eyes, her confession, her vow. He could not stand silent, not anymore. "We can't outmatch them ship for ship," Daniel said, his voice steady. "But we can outthink them. Humans don't win by being stronger. We win by being unpredictable." The general scoffed, muttering about primitive strategy, but the queen raised her hand and silenced them. Her glowing gaze locked on Daniel, urging him to continue. He pointed at the map, explaining how they could lure the enemy into a nebula where sensors would fail, how smaller, faster ships could strike like knives instead of clashing like hammers. It was reckless, desperate, but it was also human. The queen's lips curved faintly. "So be it," she said. "We will fight as humans fight, like fire in the dark." The battle that followed was chaos. The rival empire descended like a storm, of steel and flame, their ships vast, their weapons tearing through the void, yet the queen's forces moved with Daniel's plan, darting into the nebula, vanishing and striking from shadows. Daniel watched from the command chamber, every muscle tight, every heartbeat a drum of fear. He was no pilot now, no soldier at the controls of a fighter, but his voice guided them, his human instincts shaping the rhythm of war. The enemy fell into the trap, their massive fleet stumbling blind in the storm of gas and light. The queen's ships struck swift and sharp, burning holes through their armor. One by one, the enemy vessels collapsed under the weight of confusion. Daniel felt his chest surge with pride. They were winning, not by power, but by spirit, by daring, by the very thing aliens mocked humanity for, their reckless refusal to bow, yet victory did not come without cost. The palace shook with news of betrayal. Several nobles had opened gates to enemy assassins. Daniel himself was forced into battle when blades clashed in the throne room. He fought with nothing but instinct and desperation, swinging a fallen guard's weapon. His arms burned, blood spilled, but he did not fall. And when at last the queen herself strode into the hall, her glowing eyes blazing, she cut down the traitors with a fury that silenced even the stones. The rival fleet, broken and scattered, fled into the void. The empire was saved, but the air in the throne room was heavy with smoke and blood. Daniel stood amidst it, trembling, his body bruised and torn. The queen descended her throne, her armor scorched, her cloak ragged, yet her presence undimmed. She stopped before him, her hand lifting his chin, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You are no pawn," she said softly, her voice carrying across the ruined hall. "You were my fire, and they all saw it." The nobles bowed low, their hatred silenced by the weight of survival. For the first time, Daniel realized the truth. The empire had not only been forced to accept him, they had been forced to respect him. Exhaustion pressed against him. But his humor rose again, fragile yet alive. "Guess the joke's on me," he whispered, forcing a grin. The queen's lips curved, not in cold command but in something real, something almost tender. "I accept," she whispered back, just as she had the first time, but now the words burned with a new meaning. Daniel knew then that his choice was made. He could never return to the man he had been, never return to the small world he once called home. He was bound to her empire, to the fire they had sparked together. His joke had become a vow. His vow had become a war, and the war had become a bond stronger than iron, stronger than fear, stronger than the silence of 1,000 years. The human's choice was not survival, not freedom, but defiance. He chose to stand, to fight, to laugh in the face of darkness, and as the alien queen stood beside him, her glowing eyes reflecting the fire of stars, Daniel understood the truth. Humanity's spirit had never been weak. It had only been waiting for someone to see it. And now, together, they would teach the galaxy to never underestimate a joke, nor the human who dared to speak it.
Thank you for joining Eternal Human Spirit, where humanity always rises again.